I love that poem by Kimberly Blazer, Standing Together in Kinship. Just a great poem. Today I'm thinking about this famous image that I'm sure you have seen at some point in your life. She is an image that is often outside of courtrooms as we're talking about justice today, both in our service and then also in our small group touchstones groups. I'm thinking about the image that is often used to depict justice. Lady Justice. Lady Justice is normally depicted seated on a throne, and she has a sword in one hand and she has scales in the other, and she's wearing a blindfold. Now, the scales represent the rebalancing of society, often after a wrong has been done. And the sword represents the swiftness and decisiveness with which justice is delivered. And these tools, this image, it goes way back in history. The Roman goddess Justitia and the goddess Dike held both of those items as well. But what I found interesting is that Lady Justice was not blindfolded until about the 16th century. And I was curious to know how this came to be. And apparently her blindfold started as a satirical depiction. It was a satirical depiction to show that justice was not evenly dispensed. The privileged and the powerful had their crimes ignored, while others received exceptionally harsh punishments. It's kind of an irony, a funny twist of fate that the blindfold began to represent the exact opposites of what the satire originally intended. Today, blindfolded justice means impartiality before the law. It is the aspiration that no one receives special favor. In other words, she is blind to the people who come before her so that she can evenly dispense her justice. Now, this got me thinking about the notion of impartiality and its relationship to justice. It made me wonder, is impartiality enough for justice? I had this beloved church member out in my last congregation, which was in Livermore, California. And every time I would use the term social justice, I could expect to see him standing in that greeting line after the service because he would have something to say. There is no such thing as social justice, he would thunder. And what he meant is that justice is essentially about equal treatment before the law. Social justice, the idea that justice means more than this, that it means more than legal impartiality, did not exist, or so he would say. Now, we just passed the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday this past Monday, and I'm reminded that in some of his speeches, he did talk about justice as impartiality. His famous "I Have a Dream" speech challenged the laws of segregation that were far from impartial. He wanted people to have equal treatment before the law as well as equal treatment in the rest of society. But it's also true that his vision of justice expanded beyond impartiality. He increasingly challenged the unequal distribution of wealth that left many in abject poverty without their basic needs being met. He argued for an economic bill of rights which entailed a much fuller vision of what justice could be. It was an idea of people's basic needs, their needs for shelter and warmth, food and health care, education and recognition as important considerations of justice. Of course, then and now we're told that such a vision of justice is impracticable, utopian, unworkable. for all kinds of different reasons, such as the super rich needing more tax breaks or something like that. Don't get me started there. That's another sermon. What's been in my mind, though, and what I will get started on today, is the migrant crisis that Chicago and other parts of the United States are facing right now. And I have this image in my head, this image of these folks who are arriving here in Chicago in single-digit or negative temperatures without a coat, without warm clothing. Are we a society, are we just if we fail to address that need? Can we in any way call ourselves just if we fail to address that circumstance? I have to think that justice is more than impartial treatment before the law. It must also be about meeting people's basic needs for survival and flourishing. Now, I know that the collection that we will take up in a bit, the collection of coats for migrants, is not going to address this larger need for justice. Because essentially, that effort that I'll talk about in just a little bit, it's not about changing laws. But it does do something. It does lean in that direction. It does begin to ignite our hearts to more fully consider what justice can be and what we can do as a society for one another. It broadens our attention. It turns our hearts outward. It starts to change them from a hardened rock to an open door, from a wall into a blossom. And in doing that, it makes us lean into a wider, fuller, more beautiful, more passionate vision of justice. It isn't perfect. It isn't an end. But it's a start. It's a start. Let it be a start.
Archbishop Desmond Tutu was a South African Anglican cleric and theologian who received the Nobel Peace Prize in 1984 for his work as an anti-apartheid and human rights activist. Matthew Meyer is a Unitarian Universalist musician, educator, community organizer, and worship leader. The two never met, but Matt learned that Bishop Tutu had once said, "If you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. If an elephant has its foot on the tail of a mouse and you say that you are neutral, the mouse will not appreciate your neutrality." And Matt was inspired. He was inspired to try to share that message with people of all ages by writing Desmond Gets Free, our story that we heard earlier. Inspired is an interesting word. And on a practical level, it means that we experience something, we hear something, see something, learn about something, and we are moved to create something new. We are motivated to do something that we would not have done before. The word means that somehow spirit comes in and transforms or activates our own spirit, which in turn pushes a new idea or message or piece of art or activity out into the wider world. Matt Meyer heard the words of Bishop Tutu and looked at Bishop Tutu's life and his activism, and then he created a story that encourages everyone who hears it to refuse to turn away from injustice. It's a story that shows us, that lets us experience how working together to make change is more effective than trying to fix everything ourselves. It is a story that inspired our service today. And that's how inspiration works. One mouse brings 3 mice, who brings 3 mice, and so on. It has a snowball effect. You experience something that awakens your heart. It makes your flower bloom. And you allow it to move through you to make change. And then someone else may be inspired. And someone else may join your efforts, bringing their unique gifts to the message. Matt could not ignore injustice any more than Bishop Tutu could, but he was not a famous cleric. He did not have the giant ear of world leaders. He was a storyteller, and so he brought that gift to the movement for social justice. Members of our community, as Lucas said, have seen the migrant crisis in our area. People being dropped off in the middle of a bitterly cold Midwestern winter without the resources to survive. They were inspired to take action. For inspiration, the movement of spirit can also come from seeing, hearing, or experiencing the worst actions of humanity. We can see people being stingy and be moved to generosity. We can see people being cruel and be motivated to kindness. We can see the suffering of others and have our empathy and compassion awakened. We can be inspired to come together to offer mercy and to celebrate our shared humanity. Members of our social justice and racial justice teams have been inspired to invite all of us to add our gifts to the work of a Chicago organization that works not just to meet immediate needs, but to promote the success and thriving of new immigrants. They have determined and identified the immediate needs of these new members of our community and have organized a way to get help directly to people who need it. And we will talk more detail about that a little bit later. When we open ourselves to the work of the spirit of love, the spirit of compassion, the spirit of justice, and when we look around us for others who are in need and for those who are already doing the work of change, we can be inspired to join together, to roll that justice snowball even bigger until it is an unstoppable force. Who are you hearing today? What is awakening in you? How are you being transformed? And what will you add?